An estate late or a deceased estate is the estate of a person once they've passed away.
And I can imagine that can be quite a stressful and actually emotional process for the family if no one has been appointed.
In South Africa, we have freedom of testation. So whatever your will says, the executor has to abide by. Once a property is sold, all the heirs have to consent to the sale of the property. You want to sort those problems out before you find a buyer, not afterwards.
Welcome, Kerry-Lee, to another episode of RealTalkSA. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so happy to have you. I'd like you just to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your firm.
My name is Kerry-Lee Van Heerden. My firm is KL Attorneys. It was opened 2 months ago. So we're very, very new, very fresh. I've been in practice for over 10 years, though, primarily conveyancing and deceased estates. So the philosophy behind KL Attorneys is to come alongside people as they journey through life and help them on their legal journeys. So whether they're getting married, whether there's a new baby and they need to do some financial planning. I'm not a qualified financial planner, but we do estate planning, wills, anything notarial, and obviously conveyancing primarily with transferring properties.
What is it that led you on this journey? If you can maybe share a little bit more with us on that.
Yeah, so I actually got into law kind of by default. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and my mom was adamant that I have a profession, and law was what appealed most to me. Unfortunately for my father, because he's an accountant, and that just wasn't going to happen. So, but after getting into law, it really has just been seeing how people's lives can be improved just with a little bit of legal knowledge and legal assistance. People get terrified when anything legal comes up, and most of the time it's really not an issue. And it's so it's being able to journey alongside people and see them grow and watch them grow. And then obviously, as you know, our fathers died quite closely together, and we've journeyed through that together. So when it comes to deceased estates, I have quite a personal compassion for people going through that situation. And I think what really surprised me, although it shouldn't have because he was a wonderful man, was my father's funeral. It was overflowing, and I couldn't understand who all of these people were that cared enough to come to his funeral. And it turned out that they were all his clients. And they were all, like, just one by one, they came up to me and told me how he had touched their lives. And I mean, he was an accountant. It's not like that's the most exciting, thrilling way to reach people and to touch people. But he did. And yeah, so that's my motivation. And it's become quite a full circle because I'm now practicing from his offices. So
That's such a beautiful story. I have been to those offices, and I know in the boardroom there's still a quote on the whiteboard that we are not to wipe off at all ever. And what a beautiful story that you can follow in his footsteps, even in a different industry. But, you know, accountants are also someone that you deal with sometimes when it comes to estate late. So the two are very much interlinked. And thank you for sharing that with us. As I said, earlier as well, we deal with people's emotions when it comes to selling property. And especially in this instance, you know, you're not just selling someone's property. It's often a family home that they've been in for 15, 20, 30 years, or it's been an investment property and they've never been to it. There's so many different scenarios. And I think all the better that you've been through it personally yourself and that you can hold their hand, every step of the way. So thank you for sharing that. I really, really appreciate that. And we wish you all the best in that journey. So today we're basically going to talk about anything that anyone needs to know when it comes to dealing with a late estate. So maybe with our first question, if you can let our listeners know what actually is an estate late, because I think a lot of people don't really know what those two words mean. So in layman's terms, you can just explain to us what exactly that is.
Sure. An estate late or a deceased estate is the estate of a person once they've passed away. So all of their assets, all their debts, all of that pulled together into the estate. I think one thing that people don't realize is that no one has authority to deal with that estate until an executor has been appointed. So if someone has a will, they would have nominated the executor in terms of their will. And if they don't have a will, we refer to it as intestate, and the family then has to appoint an executor. So only once that executor has been appointed is anyone authorized to deal with any of the assets in the estate.
And I can imagine that can be quite a stressful and actually emotional process for the family if no one has been appointed. So how does this change the transfer process when dealing with an estate late?
So it changes the transfer process quite considerably. So either when you are selling the property from the estate, which is probably what you'll primarily deal with, then you obviously have to get the letters of executorship issued before a sale agreement can be signed. I think a lot of people get into trouble where the heirs start to negotiate and do all sorts of things, but there's no one who's actually authorized to sign the sale agreement, and it might turn out that it's not in the best interest of the estate. So you've got to remember that the executor's role is to maximize benefit for the heirs. So, just because your friend wants to buy the property that you've lived in all your life and it's, beautiful arrangement and all the rest, they're buying it at below market value. The executor can't sign off on that because it doesn't benefit the heirs. So that's the most important thing, is to not get going until you've got letters of executorship. Then once a property is sold, all the heirs have to consent to the sale of the property. So if only one or two of them have been involved in the process, that can cause issues down the line. So it's very important that all the heirs are involved in the whole process. So it needs to be, very open communication, discussing with everyone, finding out if there's going to be problems down the line, because you want to sort those problems out before you find a buyer, not afterwards, because you can lose the sale that way.
Exactly. I was actually appointed as the executor on my late dad's estate. Very stressful position to be in. And exactly that, I think one of the challenges we had was the process took so much longer because we had to get everyone to sign. So when you refer to heirs, it's obviously if any family members, or am I right in saying that?
Yeah,
brothers, sisters?
generally, yes. It depends on what the will says. So in South Africa, we have freedom of testation. So whatever your will says, the executor has to abide by. So if you've left a will and left everything to your best friend, then that's there.
Okay.
But if there's no will, then the heirs would be the next of kin. So spouse and children. If there's no spouse and children, then they look at siblings and parents and they go further out in the family tree.
So in our case, it was obviously myself, my two siblings and my mum. And we were all over the country. So getting everyone to sign those documents was quite stressful. And then obviously having to wait for the master of the deeds, to master of the court.
Yes, the master of the high court. So once you have your signed sale agreement and once the heirs have consented to everything, the power of attorney still needs to go through to the master's office for endorsement. Now, that process can be anything from a couple of days to months. So I think the quickest I got an endorsed power of attorney back was about 5 days. And then there have been others where it takes a year and a half.
So that basically brings us to our next question, which is, does an estate late transfer take longer than a normal transfer?
Yes, very much so. It doesn't have to. I've had some that have gone through quicker than any other transfers that I have. But there are a number of factors at play, and if any one of them topples, then you've got delays. So primarily, it's dealing with the Master of the High Court. So if there are delays there, for example, they lose the estate late file, and then you can do nothing until they find it. So that can take months, depending on the circumstances. But it also depends on the setup with the family structure and that sort of thing. So if someone has passed away and they're the only one who lives in the property and none of the family are close, there's a big chance that there's going to be arrear rates, arrear levies, maybe a mortgage bond that has defaulted, potentially maintenance issues in the property itself. So those sorts of things need to be fixed before you sell the property. Otherwise, they do cause delays. Obviously, with the getting rates clearance, the municipality doesn't accept guarantees or undertakings, so that all has to be paid up front. There are ways and means around it, but that can cause delays.
So you've already mentioned, obviously, some challenges that might arise during an estate late transfer. What would your role as the conveyancer be, and how could you assist somebody that's going through that process and with those specific challenges as they arise?
So ideally, and this is what I'm trying to encourage all my clients, ideally, they phone me before they sign a sale agreement. Because if we deal with it at that point, it can make everything a lot smoother. So it just depends on the circumstances. So your conveyancer is the person who connects with everyone and manages and guides the whole process through. So from discussing with the heirs, making sure everyone's on board, checking with that, making sure that the buyers are aware that the person who has knowledge of any defects in the house is gone. So the executor doesn't have any knowledge of the property. The executor seldom ever goes to the property. So I think it's mostly open communication and then just managing the different processes that run simultaneously and keeping everyone updated. I find as long as everyone is updated, even if there are delays, as long as they know what's going on, they're comfortable. It's as soon as they don't hear from you that they start to wonder if there's something that's amiss.
I think feedback and communication is so important in our industry, but also in this particular, type of transfer process. Would you be able to maybe tell our listeners a little bit more about the costs that are involved with an estate late transfer?
Sure. Well, the costs for the buyer are the same. It doesn't impact them. So any additional costs would be for the estate, and they vary. Usually they're quite minimal. So obviously having to go through the extra steps of getting the power of attorney endorsed. If they've lost the title deed, that often happens when everyone's scratching around trying to work out where the title deed is. So there's processes there to deal with a lost title deed, which can potentially also cause delays. But if it's picked up at the beginning, you can avoid any delays. So the costs are generally quite minimal, but again, it depends on the circumstances. So if you're dealing with arrears and defaults and that sort of thing.
Great. And Kerry-Lee, if anyone wants to get hold of you or have more questions, they might have just gone through this process or about to go through the process, where would be the best way for them to contact you to get more information?
I am on Facebook and Instagram. I do have a website in process. It should hopefully be coming live this week. Otherwise, they can contact me on my cell phone or email.
Great. So we'll definitely put those information or those contact details in the comment boxes below. Thank you so much for all your information. Just to end off, the role that you play, and especially estate lates, are a little bit different than any other ordinary sale. And I can just already tell, that you have so much passion for it and compassion for those people having to go through it. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm hope to have you back here soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.